All right. I even have titled this morning. Okay, welcome to Three Questions, where I ask colleagues and friends in the literacy world to choose three questions from a list of five, and then we talk about stuff. And somewhere in that conversation, I try to mention my new book, The Art of Fiction, and how it applies. Today, I have the honor and joy of talking with Carl Anderson, who is an internationally recognized expert in writing instruction, which I know not only from the many books that he's written that have literally saved my teaching life, like How's It Going? Assessing Writers, more recently, How to Become a Better Writing Teacher. And I'm so looking forward to your new book, Teaching Fantasy Writing, which is coming out soon, right? Soonish?
Yes, July, I think.
Why? Oh my gosh, amazing. So I know that Carl is an expert in writing instruction from his books, but I also had the privilege and honor of having Carl as one of my first teaching mentors in my classroom, and got to watch him be an expert in writing instruction with my live human children and me. I'm so glad to be speaking with you, and thank you for joining me here today. Hi, Carl.
Well, it's great to be here, Kate. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So the way I have this structured is that I asked you to choose three questions from a list of five that I sent. It's the same five questions that I'm sending to everyone that I'm talking to this summer. And I know that the first question you chose was, what is your educator origin story? I am a superhero fan. The fact that your fantasy book is coming out is amazing. You and I have a affinity to fantasy in general. So I'm a big fan of origin stories. How did you become an
This is
educator?
this is great, Kate, because it's kind of like doing those Avenger origin, like those movies where they do the origin stories of Spider-Man. So, yeah, picking up on that theme. How did I become an educator? I think from the beginning, Kate, it was all about relationships with kids. I started teaching when I was 16 on sailboats in the Great South Bay, and I really loved um, being in boats with kids, and I love talking with them, and I love teaching them stuff and getting to know them. And so, later on, after I graduated from college, some friends of mine had taught in the Catholic school system in New York City, and I figured, wow, boats are to classrooms like kids are to kids. I mean, how different could it be? Um, but it was kind of the start there, and I discovered my first year I taught in New York City. I taught sixth grade in the Catholic school system, and it was radically different initially than teaching sailing. I stood in front of 38 children, and I was not a very good teacher my first year. Um, kind of talked at them a lot, and it was frustrating because I wasn't getting to know them. That's the whole motivation that I had. And I had these children that were so different than me in so many ways, fascinating kids with lives that were so, I knew would be very interesting to get to know, but I wasn't getting to know them until, drum roll, um, I got a copy of Lucy Calkin's The Art of Teaching Writing, and and I read it, and it was like, oh my gosh, kids can write about their lives, and oh my gosh, I'll get to know them if I do this writing workshop thing. And then even more interesting, Lucy talked about having writing conferences with kids, right? And talking to kids about their writing, and I was like, oh my gosh, you can do that in classrooms. No one had ever had a conference with me, K to 12. And so I launched a writing workshop my second year, and that was that. As soon as I
The
launched
second,
it, the kids, sorry?
your second year. That's amazing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I went to the project for Saturday reunions that second year, and it was, I remember a keynote that Lucy did. It was the motif was like there was the sound of revolution in the air. And at that point, writing workshop was a really different methodology, and it was really pretty radical to have kids write about their topics, their lives, and to talk to kids. And I loved that feel. And the first, I remember that first mini lesson was kind of like, I told some stories from my life, and then I asked the kids to turn and talk and then share a couple stories out. And this little girl named Veronica stands up and says, I need to write about my sister because she died last year of leukemia. And that set the tone for that writing workshop. The kids that I had 37 that year, I think, they just wrote from their life experiences. Not all of them wrote about stuff like that. Some of them wrote about their cats or whatever. But it was just so inspiring to me just to tap into that well of creativity and interest in that their lives. And that's what hooked me
Oh,
into
we
this.
lost you, Carl,
That
but here
cool.
we go. We're doing it. I love that the idea of like the origin of getting to know kids. And I think about it now, and you saying that Lucy's keynote was like a radical revolution of writing workshop,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
thinking about where we are now, right? And I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of places I am where I think having kids write about their lives, particularly in middle and high school,
Mhm.
still feels a little bit like a radical revolution, or again, it feels like a radical revolution, sort of
Right.
post years and years of Common Core and high stakes testing and essay based writing and writing about text. And now we've got the new curriculums. It's interesting how sort of these old moves and structures that you and I know decently well, they feel both in some ways old but also new, fresh.
Yep.
Like, oh my gosh, you could write about your lives with your students and really get to know them in a way that like will feed everything else you do in your classroom, right?
Right.
If you
And
have that connection,
right.
like your instinct as an educator is I need to connect with these kids, and like that's
Mhm.
exactly it.
Right. Right. And
Hard
and
to do that.
we know so much about the connection between engagement and learning. And when kids, choosing your topic, whether it's personal narrative or memoir, or whether it's a feature article, a nonfiction, or an argument, or a fantasy story. I mean, we know the link between choice and engagement. And when it's not just because we're touchy feely people. I'm not that touchy feely actually, but it's because we know that engagement is so strongly linked to learning. So when kids choose topics of interest to them, they learn so much more about writing. And but the relationships that we form with them are not just the byproduct; they are one of the central goals of working with them, because we know that kids learn best when they have strong relationships to their teacher mentors. So
Absolutely. And you talk about relationships and being touchy feely and all that. And I love that because the idea of, I think, relationship building gets so sort of like turned around, that it means that I'm like maternal in some way, or I'm close to
right,
my kids like me. And it's like, obviously, all I want in the world is for everyone to like me.
yeah, and
My kids are,
ironically, Kate,
that is my main drive to exist in the world. But like, it's not about that with kids, right?
right,
It's more
right, and of
about like,
course, you
no,
and I
you go
both
ahead.
taught middle school. You and I both taught middle school, and of course, we both chose kids to teach that generally were predisposed not to like us very much. And um, I have this love of teaching eighth grade people who generally really don't want to talk to us that much, but on the surface, but deep down they really do want relationships with teachers that are meaningful. And so I definitely did not have touchy feely relationships with eighth graders, but I had a lot of really interesting relationships. And sometimes based on a shared love of a sports team or different sports teams, or just a book that we had read to, that we had in common, or just so many different ways. I just tried to find some in with every kid, some kind of connection that would enable me then to talk to make the sell for writing, that this is actually really a worthwhile thing to learn how to do, which is still a hard sell. It's a hard sell with adults sometimes,
It's
much
still a
less
hard
children.
sell. Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. And like that idea of relationship building and connecting through the idea of writing about our lives. Like I don't have to be touchy feely and you don't have to like me. We don't even need common interests, but I, as your
Hmm.
teacher, am giving you avenues to be your authentic self. And I am
Right. Right.
loving your authentic self. Like what you
Yep.
write about, I think is great, even if it's cats. Yeah, I love
Hmm.
cats. Hey, let's write
Hmm.
about cats all year long if you want to, right?
Yep.
But like you
Yep.
have space to be you in this classroom, which is only going to help you write, which then is only going to help you write better, even about texts, right? And I
Hmm.
think we've missed that in the conversation so much with
Right.
lit essay and writing about reading, is that if we don't start from a place of, to your point, connection, stamina, do you know what I mean? Just being able
Hmm.
to sit down and get some words on the page, we're not going to
Right.
get very,
Right. Right.
yeah, I love that. Okay, wait, I could just talk to you forever, but a second question.
Okay.
Yep. Question two, your favorite and least favorite educational phrases.
All right, well, you're not going to be surprised by my favorite phrase, um,
Okay.
which is,
Oh,
"How's it going?" The
yes.
question that, yes, yes, the question that we we've learned from Don Murray's work from the 1960s and 70s is such an important way to start writing conferences or reading conferences or any kind of conference with the child. And it's my favorite because I think the question speaks to what you and I and our colleagues really value about teaching, that I need to get to know you as a writer in a writing conference. I need to figure out what you're trying to do. I need to figure out your strengths to help me figure out where I'm going to go with you, where what I can build on, and I need to engage in a relationship with you. Um, so that question is leads to conversation, and conversation is going to lead to, is an avenue towards having a relationship with a child as a learner. So it's such a powerful question to ask children. And it is something that is sometimes still takes kids aback. I'm sure you have this experience. Like, it's sad to me in a middle school when I ask that question, and a kid's like, "Why are you asking that? No one's ever asked me that before." Um,
Mhm.
but
Well,
I mean, I
because it
want kids.
puts I mean, what's so powerful about that, right? When you taught me how to do this, or taught me how to confer, is that it puts the responsibility a little bit on the kid, right? It's like the student has to have a sense of their own reading or their own writing work, right? Of like, what is it that I'm doing right now that I can even
Hmm.
say? And even though it might seem subtle, it's a radical shift from like, I'm the
Hmm.
teacher, I'm going to take your piece and read it, right? I remember you literally taking pieces of writing out of my hands that I was trying to like read from beginning to end to give the kids feedback. And you're like, no, it's
Hmm.
the kids' job, at least at the beginning of this conversation, to
Hmm.
tell us where we should begin, right? Where the work should start.
Right.
It's
And
beautiful.
I think you're so right to say that that question puts responsibility on children. I mean, a relationship implies two people, and and to say how's it going is to shift the responsibility onto the child, that you have a responsibility to share yourself, to talk about what's going on here so that I can help you. I grew up with a very education was done to me.
Yeah.
I had a very passive stance towards school. I was very good at the game of school in my time, but when I hear kids who have learned to answer that question but even in lower grades, but certainly been at elementary school and middle school, kids have conversations with me that I couldn't have had in high school about
Yeah.
what they're trying to do as writers. At second, I'll start the conference with the second graders. How's it going? And they'll say, "I'm trying a lot of crafting moves in my writing, like for example." And it's like, oh my gosh, this child is not only is learning a lot about writing, but they are so metacognitive of what they're doing, and they take such ownership of their work, and they're such more active learners than I ever was at that age. I was just trying to get everything right, quote unquote right, and
Right.
not make mistakes. And I was not someone with a lot of agency. I was not someone that was really invested in my work. I just wanted to please my parents and my teachers.
Yeah, I relate to that. I relate to that. When I think also, you know, I sometimes get feedback, which I empathize with. I remember feeling it in the classroom from teachers of like, but the kids don't know what to say, right? And it can feel so much harder to start from a place of how's it going?
Yep.
Because I know in my classroom, there's going to be tons of kids who for a while are like, I don't know, like it's going to take
Mhm.
time to chip away at that and to teach them how to advocate for their own work in writing or reading or
Mhm.
wherever. But like to believe on some level that that's worth the time and that that's going to feed
Mhm.
us through the rest of the year is so hopeful to me, as opposed to some of
Mhm.
the new models of teaching, right? That, or I'm sorry, the old models come again of teaching, where there's none of that. You don't ever have to really think about what to think. You actually are always going to be told
Right, right, right.
the question that you're answering, what the prompt is you're answering, what structure you should write in. It's all going to be delivered for you. There's something
Hmm.
weirdly cynical about that point of view, right? As opposed to being able to sit down with a kid and be like, how's it going? And I'm going to teach you how to answer that question.
Yep, yep, yep,
Cool.
absolutely.
Okay, sorry. Least favorite phrase. We did most
All
favorite.
right, I might surprise you with this, but my least
Okay.
favorite phrase these days is the three R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. And let me
Okay.
explain why that's my least favorite. Now I'm going to be very glib first. That phrase has always bothered me because only one of those words starts with R. So there's that. But the reason it really is bothering me today is that when you say reading, writing, and arithmetic, it seems to imply that all three are co-equal, that there's parity between them. But the truth of the matter is with writing, um, writing is not on any way the same level or considered on the same level as reading or writing. And yet writing is such an important thing for kids to learn. And I mean, I think proof of the pudding on this is that with all the shifts in reading instruction, the adoptions of all these new reading curriculums around the country, if you're changing reading curriculum, you have to change your writing curriculum. And it's remarkable to me to be in schools that have. I'm going to tell a story about a school here in New York City that I've worked in for 20 years. It's in South Brooklyn. Extraordinary school, Title I school. Most of the children are immigrants. Most of them are emergent bilingual children. And the teachers of the school, who many have been there for 20 years, have created this. They created an amazing writing curriculum and reading curriculum, and now have been forced, because of the adoption of a new reading curriculum, to throw out 20 years of work that reflects it reflects just their knowledge of kids, their knowledge of writing, their knowledge of what their kids need. And I think that's outrageous. And so the radical thing I want to suggest, Kate, I think we have assumed over the years that reading and writing should go together, like curriculum wise. And I'm coming to the point of view that maybe we should separate them, um, because writing shouldn't go out the window, or math shouldn't go out the window if writing's changed. Whatever it is, writing is too important to just have to move because something else moves. And
Yeah.
and when I say I think it should be a separate subject, I don't mean it should have its own curriculum. I actually find the schools that where the most powerful work is happening is where teachers have a lot of agency when it comes to curriculum, or they create their own. Like the school I'm referring to, they created their own curriculums, their own units of study that reflect what their kids need and their kids' interest, etc. And that's what I would strive for in PD, is to help teachers own their curriculums, because when you own it, um, you're much more invested in it. It's not just seen as a program that's going to change every couple of years. You're going to get a deep knowledge of what you're teaching, because to create curriculum is really two moves. In writing, you need to know mentor text to learn the craft moves you want to teach kids, and you need to do your own writing so you can figure out the strategies for navigating the writing process. A lot of those will be things that we do as writers, and so yeah, the three R's. It's really bugging me these days, because I think that it's funny, like, it's not funny, but in families, when there's multiple children, there's often, if one child is having an issue, the other child is often ignored. And I often feel in education, it's writing that gets, is that sibling that is kind of invisible when, these constant reading wars that we've seen for decades. It just kind of blows in the wind where it shouldn't. It's too important to be treated like that. So that's my least favorite phrase these days, Kate.
I love that. And I think that like there's two things you said in there that I think are so huge to pop out. Like one is just the idea of separating out writing and reading. And like I don't know whether it's right or wrong. I feel like on some level I don't know anything anymore about what's right or wrong. Well, that's not true. I don't know everything about what's right or wrong. But um the idea that you're saying that like writing always gets knocked into service
Hmm.
of reading in some way,
Hmm.
right? It's like writing becomes like a way that kids express their reading understanding is not
Hmm.
being a writer, right? And what I learned with
Right.
you, with Lucy, and with my mentors and teachers is that it really is writing is born from creative, more personal, choice-based writing.
Hmm.
Like it's the ability to write. And since
Hmm.
Common Core, right, since the high stakes tests, that has just slowly been sort of bled out of schools, except in places that have had the sort of bravery and support to be able to develop units. The idea of
Right.
separating out makes a lot of sense to me. Do you know what I mean? Because like especially now, if the reading curriculum is going to change, that kids being able to write
Right.
about their lives, write creatively, choose what they
Mhm.
write, feels really, really important.
Right. And it doesn't mean that there's not a place for writing in a reading curriculum. It is important for kids to write about their reading. And conversely, it's absolutely essential in a writing curriculum for kids to be reading texts like they're going to be making. So, but that doesn't mean that the writing has to be bundled as kind of an afterthought. And in
That's right.
in these reading curriculums. And a lot of the new reading curriculums, the writing component is it's they're very problematic. There's one that is now going back to, as we've talked about already, it's going back to kids not being able to choose topics, being given prompts. Literally, what did you do during your summer vacation? That's stuff that we outgrew as a field, we thought, in the 1980s, and now it's a return to that. And yeah, so it's there's did you ever read Walking Trees by Ralph Fletcher? It's his first book, and it's really a memoir about his first year at the Reading and Writing Project
Really?
at Teachers College. And one of the scenes that really has stayed with me for decades is at the end of the book, Ralph goes back to his school and he runs into a little girl that he worked with the previous year, but he's not working with her new teacher. And she runs up to Ralph and she says, Mr. Fletcher, do you remember me? I was a writer last year. Devastating, devastating scene. And I feel that there's so many children now that could say that. It's like, I was a writer last year and I don't have the same kind of support in my day now, in my week, in my year to help me be a writer, to learn what writers need to learn to be people who write well. And
That's right.
yeah, so I
Well,
just
it's huge. And I think the other piece that you brought up that I think is so big and that you particularly taught me early on, that I resisted very much, I think, at the time, if I remember correctly, is the idea of writing your own curriculum and knowing how to do that and teacher written curriculum, and not necessarily like every individual for themselves, but the
Mhm,
ability as a classroom teacher, like the fact that I am able to say, because of you and the people I worked with, okay, I want to write a memoir unit. I don't need anybody else really. Do you know what I mean? Like
mhm,
I should get resources, I should get all sorts of information, but really at the end of the day, what I need to do is I need to read some memoirs and I need to write a memoir. I need to do my own
mhm,
writing and step back and ask
right.
myself, what did I do that I could teach my group of kids, right? And what I notice when people have curriculum, whether it's written by me or a big company or anybody else that's not me as the classroom teacher, the team of people that are working with kids, if I'm using someone else's curriculum, at the end of the day, I still have to loop back and do some of that own writing myself,
Hmm.
read some
Hmm.
examples, study some mentors, and unpack them, or else I will not be able to coach kids into getting better. I'll
Right,
only be
right.
able to follow the curriculum.
One of the most brilliant people I know in terms of helping teachers learn to write writing curriculum is Matt Glover, um,
Yeah.
and who is the co-author of my recent book, How to Become a Better Writing Teacher. And I've learned so much from Matt about this process. It was such a great PD experience for both of us to write a book together. But what Matt knows about writing curriculum and helping people learn to do that and feel like they can do it, I think is such important work. And yeah, and I just it, it's a powerful thing for teachers to be able to do. And and I think that initial resistance makes sense. I think there's the paradigm in teaching is that curriculum is provided to teachers as if they can't be curriculum developers, and that it's the job of other people to do it, and then it's the job of teachers to deliver curriculum that other people wrote. But at the end of the day, no one knows the children in one classroom and knows exactly what they need to learn today or this month or this year. And it's great to have, I mean, I use curriculum as a resource. It's interesting to go to somebody else's unit and see, what did this person do in this realistic fiction unit? What did this person think was important in this nonfiction unit? But um, I think it's a very powerful thing when teachers learn to create curriculum. And I remember the work we did at your middle school that you first worked at, and it was powerful work to do that. And I think very empowering for you and for your colleagues to do that.
So yeah, like I remember really fighting you on it. Like I remember there was one period, a lunch period or something that we were meeting, and my rowdy kids were coming in the next period, and I just remember being like, Carl, I need you to give me the strategies. I need you to give them to me. I need a list of strategies to teach next period. And I remember at the time you were like, I'm not going to give that to you. Like, and because you were like, it's not going to help you. You think it's going to help you, but it's not going to help you. And
Mhm.
I think you were really right about that. Do you know what I mean? Because it was uncomfortable for me, right? To
Mhm.
then go in and not have this sort of cheat sheet of strategies in front of me. But it forced me to be like, no, I have to learn how to teach this.
Mhm. Mhm.
I can't
Yeah, and I
depend fidelity to some list that Carl Anderson gave me, right? Or
yeah,
fidelity
or
to
anybody.
some list
Yep.
Roberts gave me, or Lucy Calkins, or Houghton Mifflin, or anybody. They can't give
Right.
me the list of things that's going to crack the code of my kids, to your point.
And what I probably said to you was something like, Kate, you know the strategies to teach your kids because you know how to write.
Yeah.
And what do you do? And you have to think about that. And so this kid's stuck. What do you do? This kid's planning. What do you do?
Yeah.
And if there's a craft technique you need to learn, well, let's look at a mentor text with the child.
That's
It's right there. And
right.
but I think I think that's a really important lesson for new teachers to learn. I think that if you start dependent upon curriculum, it's really hard to outgrow that. Um, and but if you and of course, this is the hard thing today. It's like you need the support. I mean, you had meetings with a guest teacher, i.e., me, and your colleagues every time I was in the building, and you met at other times to do that. That's a commitment of time and resources to support you in that journey. You can't just throw people in and say, "Okay, create a curriculum," um, when you may not have had any experience with that in your teacher preparation work. And but that's a conversation for schools to have. Of course, it's so much easier just to buy curriculum, right? And it seems so much easier to do, and but and it can sometimes, I think, be a starting place. I mean, it can be a starting place. I remember going to teachers college and having Catherine Bomer and Randy Bomer as my instructors, who walked me through some of the units they had done, always with the caveat, though. They said, this is what we did, but we don't think that this is how it's going to go in your classroom. Here's kind of a repertoire, but you're going to have to really, this doesn't take the place of getting to know your kids. This
That's
doesn't
right.
take the place of you don't have to read their writing. You got to really look at that. And I found every time I did a unit that I learned from somebody else for the first time, because they opened my eyes to the idea that we needed to really be curriculum decision makers, that I was changing it as I did it, and making lists of things I would do differently next year, and
Yeah.
quickly made them my own. And I think that's so important.
Well, and this is the problem with changing curriculum every 4 or 5 years, right? Because no matter where you start, a group of teachers is going to have to sit down and do this work that we're talking about, right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
lots of people who are online right now talking about how, like, okay, we've got these box curriculums. We still have to go in and do all the work of making this curriculum fit our kids, which we can do. It's fine. Except that if it changes every 4 or 5 years, then it's like, oh my gosh, we have to do this again, right? So it's like, no matter
right,
what, any group of teachers that really wants to move kids is going to have to grapple with this question of how do we make any
right,
kind of curricular materials fit the actual students in front of us. And so
right,
whether you want to do it at the beginning or at the end, it has to happen at some point. Okay, wait,
right.
we're going on and on. I'm going to do my last question just so that
Okay.
we don't hour long podcast, although I could with you. What is a motto you would have that you would adopt for teaching?
I would say the thing that I think a lot about these days, the motto would be know the principles of learning and stick to them the best you can. And I think that's really important today. Matt Glover and I wrote a blog for the Heinemann blog on to help people that are considering the adoption of new instructional approaches to writing. And we grounded the whole thing in the principles of learning. And if you know your principles, is going to help you either make decisions like maybe we shouldn't do the writing component of this reading curriculum, maybe we should do something else, or at least modify what you're given to make it more congruent with those principles. I mean, we're talking about really basic things like kids need time to learn to write. So does this instructional approach give kids time? Do kids have mentors? Do they get to study mentor authors? Or does their teacher is their teacher a mentor of process? Is instruction differentiated in conferences and small groups? Is the teacher, does the teacher have an opportunity to make decisions about curriculum, and so on and so on? And I think, that's the North Star. It's what we know about how kids learn that I think is so important to hold close to our chest, and to use as a lens to, in these very, very volatile times in education, when there's a lot of change, those principles are going to hopefully help us either have important conversations about it, with writing it, and reading, like, wait a second, we know this about learning, and is this congruent with that? Or what changes can I make to what I'm given if I'm in a situation where I have to do something to make it more congruent to those principles? So I think that's the motto I'm trying to think about a lot, Kate. And I wonder sometimes, and of course, I think you and I are pretty similar as in our in how we do our work, in the sense that I know you're very hard on yourself, in terms of, what am I doing here? How can I do this better when I'm someone who's a guest teacher and supportive of teachers, and I am too. And, I'm not always sure that when I look back, did I really ground the work I did in that school with the principles of learning, or did I just go in and launch writing workshop without that conversation, or at least contextualizing? This is what I'm doing here because we know that this is going to help kids learn. Like the simple thing about topic choice, like, just to say, hey, we know engagement is linked to higher learning outcomes, if you want to put it that way, like in Ellen Keene's book on engagement. We've learned a lot about that. But so that's why I'm doing a lesson today on helping kids choose topics instead of giving kids topics. And I wonder if I could have done more of that in the schools that I have been in over the years. But today it's what I try to do. Just first and foremost, this is what we know about teaching and learning, and this explains what I'm doing, especially if it's kind of catching you, like you're surprised by what I'm doing.
That's right. Lucy used to, let us all, when we did institutes at the Reading and Writing Project, to start off with the philosophy of learning that embeds reading and writing workshop with maybe Brian Camborne's conditions for learning, right? To make
Mhm.
sure that, like, talk about how, reading and writing workshop, we didn't come up with these things, or people didn't come up with these things just out of nowhere, right? Like, teaching us to, root in the philosophy of reading and writing workshop, right? Root in Brian Camborne's conditions of learning, so that it's not that we're doing reading and writing workshop because this is the jargon of reading and writing workshop. It's not like copyright TCRWP or copyright Carl Anderson or copyright whatever. We're doing this because they're rooted in a philosophy and conditions that we know are true for anyone to learn, which actually allows me to do the thing that I'm supposed to do, which is talk about my new book, because I do, in
Yay.
my new book, which is coming out, The Heart of Fiction, really soon, in a few weeks, I
Oh,
think.
wait, Kate, hold
Yeah,
it up. Don't just throw
so
it.
bad at
Hold
this,
it up
girl.
and
Okay,
put
doing
it back
this. Yeah,
up.
there it is.
No,
There's
no,
my
no.
cover.
I can't see the whole cover. Make sure and just leave it there and talk so we can all see it.
I
Okay, and its name
appreciate the
is
source again. This is
The
my
Art of
weakest link.
Fiction,
So, The
Reading
Heart
for
of Fiction.
Characters, Theme, and Craft.
And part of this book, which I'm excited about, is that the first chapter talks about some conditions that I see being necessary for growth in reading for older kids, right? Middle and high school kids. If we want them to be better at analyzing books, I offer a bunch of strategies in this book and, like, really practical stuff, because I really believe in that right now for teachers, that teachers need a lot of grab and go materials just to, like, keep their head above water. But one of
Hmm.
the arguments I make is that without the conditions for learning, without the conditions for kids to be able to read and write more powerfully, it doesn't matter what strategy I teach. It doesn't matter what thing I give them. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't matter what lesson I do. It's the
Yeah,
conditions for kids being able to practice, to try, to choose, to see themselves. Those are the things that make this stuff work, regardless of the kind of curriculum that you're using,
yeah.
right?
Just to talk about the importance of your work. Um, this new book, which I'm looking forward to getting, and but also your other works on reading as well. I think the national conversation about reading has become so oversimplified. It's become all about decoding, and and whether you accept that, you know, this way or that way of teaching kids to read, at some point kids learn to read, and what do we do with them at that point? That's not in this conversation. You and I were both at the New York State Reading Association in November. The second day after you left, there was a panel that I went to, and they made that point that, like, in upper elementary, middle, and high school, based on the typical measures of growth, kids aren't growing that much as readers. And what is it that we should be teaching kids as readers? And I think that's what's so exciting about your work, Kate, is that you have answers that you've developed to that question, and very powerful answers. And I just think the work that you have done in your writing is so essential for teachers to grapple with, um, and to help them think about what the heck we're supposed to do with kids with reading. Um, and in secondary schools, for example. So, thank you for all the thinking you've done, and and I well know how much time and how much effort it takes to write books, and to pour your thinking and your heart onto the page and put it together like this, all to help ultimately teachers and, most importantly, children. So I think your contribution is, I just think it's so, so important, especially in this day and age. And I think back to you in that first year, and you told the story before. You were kind of positioning yourself as someone that was a little oppositional. But the thing I loved about you, that first year when I worked with you, Kate, is a lot of new teachers won't talk back, even if they feel something they're not sure, or they're often like so overwhelmed. It's like, just okay, I'll do everything you say. I much prefer to work with people that are really actively engaging with teaching and asking questions. And so I found you were a breath of fresh air. It's like, I loved those conversations that we had, because you were really thinking, and what was underneath the thinking you were doing is, you wanted to do right by kids, and that's where your questioning was coming from. It's like, well, why not give me a list, or why are you doing it this way, and why do you do it, what's going on here? And I think that's just been a through line in your teaching over the years, that number one, first and foremost, it's about the children. And you have throughout your career just tried to make sense of what is best practice and how can we do right by teachers and children. And I saw that from the very beginning with you, that willingness to grapple with material and ask really hard questions, and to find your own answers, not be willing just to accept on blind faith what I brought to your building or other people brought to your building. You were a thinker from the get-go, and I think that is such a characteristic of your work and the contribution that you have been making now for decades. So I wanted to celebrate and thank you for that. And that I also want to say to everybody watching this podcast, Kate's new book it's you need to get it. It's so I don't be shy about it, Kate. It's
No, this is what I'm so bad at, but we're just gonna do it anyway. But I
oh,
mean,
I'm bad about it too. If,
yeah,
if
I
we
appreciate it.
if our hats were reversed, then I was supposed to plug my books, I would say, "Oh yeah, I wrote blah 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 blah," and I would just be a little embarrassed. So,
Well, I thank you. And Carl, so much of who I am is because of who you were to me, and as a model, as a mentor, all of that. And I am unendingly grateful to you and your work, and your presence in my life. Thank you so much.
and Kate, it's just like, as a teacher, I'm still amazed that some children that I taught in the 1990s, I'm
Yeah.
connected to them on Facebook, and I'm just, and it's interesting to have been doing what I've been doing now for 30 plus years, and to know that people I knew as brand new teachers like you. Or I worked with Jen Saravallo when she was a classroom teacher. She was in a leadership group that I did. I remember working with Colleen Cruz when she was teaching fourth grade at 321. I mean, we're talking about a hall of fame here, all of you. And it's very satisfying to me to be able to say, okay, I had a little impact on people that have made huge impacts in the
Yeah.
field. And Kate, all that to say that I'm just really proud of you and your work. So, and thank you for it. So,
Thank you. It's great talking to you.
yep, great talking to you too.
Bye, Carl.